Roy Carson had been working as a janitor at the local high-end auto repair shop in Los Angeles for over 6 months. Each day, he swept the floors, cleaned oil stains, and took out the trash while listening quietly to the mechanics' chatter about turbochargers and engine mods. To them, he was just the guy in the coveralls who stayed out of the way. No one knew much about him, and few cared to ask. Roy was quiet, older than most of the crew, and always seemed focused on his work. What no one realized was that years ago he had been a lead aircraft mechanic in the U.S. Air Force. But after retiring early to take care of his sick wife and then losing her, he'd been left raising his daughter alone. Without the time or resources to jump back into his old career, Roy took the janitor job to pay the bills. One Wednesday afternoon, chaos broke out in the shop. A wealthy client had just brought in his rare McLaren for a last-minute diagnostic. The engine was stalling out, and no one could figure out why. The best mechanics were scratching their heads. Brad, the arrogant lead tech, was growing frustrated. "We've run every test, checked every valve. This thing is fine on paper." The client was growing impatient, and Brad was panicking. He looked around and then, as a joke, shouted, "Hey Roy, why don't you give it a shot? Maybe the mop can fix what 100K in training couldn't." The crew laughed, but Roy just gave a small smile. He quietly walked over, asking softly, "Do you mind if I just take a look?" Still amused, Brad gestured toward the open hood. "Knock yourself out, old man." Roy bent over the engine and, in under 5 minutes, started checking connections the others hadn't touched. He examined a hidden relay tucked deep behind the firewall, adjusted a throttle sensor most mechanics never thought twice about, and then made his way to the driver's seat. He turned the key. The McLaren roared to life, smooth, balanced, perfect. Everyone stood frozen. What did you do?" Brad stammered. Roy calmly stepped out of the car, wiping his hands. The throttle position sensor was misaligned, common in some of the older European builds. Easy to miss if you don't know aircraft calibration systems. This engine's timing mimics some of the same logic. No one laughed this time. Silence filled the room. Brad's pride was bruised and he barked, "You shouldn't have touched that car. That's above your pay grade, janitor." Roy didn't argue. He just went back to mopping the floor like nothing had happened. But upstairs, someone had been watching the security feed, the shop's owner, and for the first time in a long while, Roy's quiet talent had finally caught someone's attention. The next morning, Roy arrived at the auto shop just as the sun was rising. He clocked in like usual, grabbed his mop, and began cleaning the tiled floor near the front desk. It was a quiet start to the day, but the air felt different, thicker, more alert. He noticed the other mechanics whispering, shooting glances toward him, but he paid no mind. He wasn't there for attention. At 9:15 a.m., the rumble of engines outside interrupted the routine. Heads turned toward the garage entrance as 7 sleek black SUVs pulled into the lot, moving in perfect synchronization. Out stepped sharply dressed security personnel, followed by a man in a tailored suit, Robert Langston, CEO of Langston Automotive Corporation and owner of the shop. Everyone stood frozen. Brad wiped his hands nervously and stepped forward. "Mr. Langston, we weren't expecting you." Langston didn't respond. Instead, he walked straight toward Roy, who had stopped mopping and stood silently. The entire room watched, holding their breath. "You're Roy Carson?" Langston asked, extending a hand. "Yes, sir," Roy replied calmly, shaking his hand. "I saw what you did yesterday. That diagnostic and fix you pulled off. That wasn't luck." Roy hesitated, then nodded slightly. "I've worked on engines most of my life, spent 20 years maintaining aircraft systems. I just applied some of the same principles." Langston smiled. "And nobody here ever thought to ask what you were capable of?" Before Roy could answer, Brad interrupted. "Sir, I didn't mean to disrespect. He was just, well, he's the janitor. We didn't know." Langston turned to him, expression hardening. "That's the problem, Brad. You assumed skill comes from a title, not from experience." He turned back to Roy. "Mr. Carson, how would you feel about overseeing diagnostics for our West Coast Performance Division? We need minds like yours." not egos like his. Gasps echoed across the garage. Roy blinked, stunned. I appreciate that, sir, but I'm just used to staying behind the scenes. Langston smiled. Not anymore. Starting today, you're not just a janitor. You're leading one of our most advanced performance teams. Full salary, benefits, and a team of your own choosing. Brad's face turned pale. One of the younger mechanics whispered, "Did Roy just get promoted to head of diagnostics?" Before Roy could respond, Langston added, "Also, we're reviewing all shop policies. I want to make sure this place promotes people based on talent, not assumptions." With that, the CEO shook Roy's hand once more and headed toward his convoy. The SUVs pulled out of the lot, leaving behind a stunned crowd and a quietly smiling Roy. He looked at the mop in his hand, set it aside gently, and walked toward the locker room, not as the janitor, but as the new leader. In the corner, Brad stood frozen. The man he mocked had just become his boss.